My name was Liam Hayes, and at 17 years old, my world revolved around the tantalizing aromas and intricate processes of a kitchen. Stonnybrook, Surrey, was a picture-perfect place with its winding country lanes and quaint village shops. But for me, the real beauty was found in the vibrant colors of fresh produce and the shimmer of a perfectly emulsified sauce. While most lads my age were caught up in the latest football scores or endlessly debated video game strategies, my mind was usually occupied with perfecting a sourdough starter or experimenting with new spice blends. My Nan, a tiny woman with hands that could coax flavor out of anything, had instilled this passion in me from a young age. Her kitchen, warm and always smelling of baked apples or hearty stews, was my first classroom. She'd always told me that the best food was made with love, not just ingredients, and that a truly great cook poured a piece of their soul into every dish. That philosophy shaped everything I did. My ultimate dream, a fervent whisper I nurtured in my quiet moments, was to open my own little bistro, a cozy haven where every dish told a story and every customer left feeling cherished. It was more than a career path. It was my identity, my future, simmering gently on a low heat, just waiting for the right moment to boil over. My cooking class at Stonnybrook High wasn't just a subject I took to fill a timetable. It was the highlight of my entire week. Chef Davies, our instructor, was a gruff but fair man who appreciated genuine talent. He'd often nod approvingly at my creations, a rare compliment from him, which meant the world. This particular term, we were working on a challenging project, a dish that represented our personal culinary journey, something that spoke of who we were as cooks. I had decided on a savory tart, but not just any tart. This was a homage to my Nan's rustic approach, infused with modern techniques. It featured a delicate, melt-in-your-mouth short-crust pastry, painstakingly kneaded and chilled, then filled with a medley of slow-roasted root vegetables, parsnips, carrots, beetroot, picked fresh from the local farmer's market that very morning. To top it off, I'd layered in a rich, mature cheddar, giving it a golden, bubbly finish. I had spent hours researching different crust recipes, adjusting the roasting times for each vegetable to ensure perfect tenderness, and blending the cheeses for just the right tang. The aroma alone, a blend of earthy vegetables and toasted cheese, was enough to make your stomach rumble with anticipation. This tart wasn't just food. It was a piece of my soul on a plate, destined to be shared with my family, a testament to my dedication. The bell for lunch period rang just as I was carefully pulling the tart from the oven, its crust a perfect golden brown, the filling bubbling enticingly. Chef Davies, ever the perfectionist, nodded at my work. "Excellent, Liam," he murmured, "but it needs to cool properly before you box it up. We don't want the crust to go soggy. You can grab it from the cooling racks after your next class." A wave of frustration washed over me, but I knew he was right. I reluctantly left my masterpiece, still radiating warmth, knowing it would be safe. My mind kept drifting back to it during my English literature class, picturing the expressions of delight on my parents' and Nan's faces when I presented it to them. It was more than just a school project. It was a gift, a promise. When the final bell for the end of the school day chimed, I practically flew out of the English room and sprinted back to the cooking classroom. The hallways were nearly deserted, most students having already scattered to buses or parents' cars. My tart sat waiting, pristine on a white ceramic plate, carefully wrapped in cling film, a little condensation clinging to the inside, a testament to its lingering warmth. I picked it up with the reverence usually reserved for precious artifacts, balancing it carefully as I headed towards my last commitment of the day, an optional after-school study period. I had chosen to attend it to get a head start on my history essay, but part of me also just wanted to hold onto the lingering promise of my culinary achievement. As I stepped into the hushed study room, the air was still and quiet, save for the faint hum of computers. There were only two other students present, Chloe Peterson and Bethany Clark. Chloe, with her perfectly coiffed blonde hair and an air of effortless superiority, was the undisputed queen bee of our year group. Her smiles, often directed at boys she fancied, rarely reached her eyes, and her laughter always seemed to carry a hidden barb. Bethany, her constant shadow and best friend, was quieter, but her sharp, knowing gaze made you feel perpetually under scrutiny, always judged and found wanting. They were a formidable duo, their whispered conversations and knowing glances often leaving a trail of quiet misery in their wake. I usually navigated the school hallways with the specific goal of avoiding them, a master of subtle diversions. But today, trapped in the confines of the quiet study room, they were unavoidable. I tried to be inconspicuous, placing my precious tart gently on the very edge of my desk, hoping its presence wouldn't register. But the rich, inviting aroma of roasted vegetables and melted cheese was already wafting through the small room, impossible to ignore. Chloe, without even bothering to look up from her phone, which seemed surgically attached to her hand, sniffed the air dramatically. "What is that amazing smell?" she drawled, her voice a sickly sweet melody, clearly fishing for attention. "Did someone bring in a takeaway? It smells like a proper gourmet meal." I gritted my teeth, ignoring her, and opened my textbook, trying to immerse myself in the intricacies of the Norman conquest. Then Bethany, her eyes already zeroed in on my cling-filmed plate, chimed in. "Yeah, seriously, Liam, where did you get that? It smells absolutely incredible. Is it from that new deli in town?" A familiar surge of irritation bubbled up inside me. I sighed, glancing at my tart, a pang of protectiveness hitting me. "I made it," I stated, keeping my voice as flat and even as possible. "It's for my cooking class project." Chloe finally deigned to look up, her perfect eyebrows arching in theatrical disbelief, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. "No way," she scoffed, a high-pitched, grating laugh escaping her. "You made that. Don't be silly, Liam. You can barely toast bread without burning it." "That looks way too professional for you." Bethany snickered along with her, a conspiratorial gleam in her eyes. "He's right, Chloe, Liam. Cooking something that smells this good, that's genuinely hilarious. Did you just sneak it out of the staff room or perhaps bribe Chef Davies?" My face burned with a flush of pure annoyance. It wasn't just their disbelief. It was the deliberate mockery, the way they undermined something I held so dear. "No, I didn't," I said, a little more firmly this time, my patience wearing thin. "It's a savory tart. It's for my end-of-term project. I made it from scratch." They exchanged another glance, a silent communication passing between them, and then Chloe turned back to me, her eyes narrowed slightly, a predator scenting weakness. "You really expect us to believe that you, Liam Hayes, the quiet kid who hardly speaks, made something that smells this gourmet? Come on, be honest. Where'd you actually get it? Did your mum buy it from a fancy supermarket?" They kept repeating their taunts, their voices a duet of condescension. "No, you didn't. No, you did not." Over and over. It was utterly infuriating. I had explained multiple times, clearly and calmly, that I had crafted it myself for my cooking class. They simply chose not to believe me, or more accurately, they savored the power they felt by making me squirm. I decided they were being deliberate idiots and tried, once more, to bury my head in my textbook, hoping they'd grow bored and find another target for their malicious amusement. Not even a minute later, a soft, almost imperceptible rustling broke my concentration. I looked up and my blood ran cold. There was Chloe, standing right next to my desk, her hand reaching out. Without a single word, her fingers closed around the very edge of my white ceramic plate. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of disbelief and rising panic. What was she doing? My mind screamed. She then, with the most audacious nonchalance, began to casually walk away, my perfectly baked tart clutched in her hands, a faint, smug little smile playing on her lips. It was like a scene torn from a nightmare, unreal and grotesque. My food, my project, my hours of meticulous effort, all of it being brazenly stolen, right there in plain sight with not a shred of shame. I reacted on pure instinct, a surge of adrenaline overriding my usual cautious nature. "What the hell are you doing?" I demanded, my voice raw with disbelief and a building anger. I shot out of my chair like a spring, lunging forward and grabbing her by the arm. Not roughly, not with intent to harm, but firmly enough to stop her dead in her tracks. "Let go of my food," I reiterated, trying desperately to keep my voice steady, but the tremor of fury was undeniable. Chloe looked at me with an expression of the most exaggerated theatrical shock I had ever witnessed, as if I had just violated some sacred law of the universe. Her face twisted into a furious scowl, her perfect facade cracking. "Let go of my arm," she snapped, tugging violently against my grip. "What are you doing? Get off me, you creep." I simply stared back, refusing to yield. "No," I said, my grip tightening slightly. "You let go of my food first." She got even angrier, her eyes flashing with a venomous light. "I said, let go of my arm," she shrieked, her voice rising in pitch, louder this time. From across the relatively quiet room, Bethany, who had been silently observing the entire unfolding drama, suddenly sprang to life, jumping up and yelling, "Liam, let go of her arm right now. You can't just grab people like that. That's assault." This devolved into the most maddening, ridiculous back and forth imaginable. Me, repeatedly telling Chloe to release my food, my voice growing hoarser with each demand, and both girls, a united front of outrage, getting more and more furious, screaming at me to let go of Chloe's arm. It was an exercise in pure absurdity. She was undeniably trying to steal my property, my personal creation, and they were acting as if I was the one committing a heinous crime. I refused to release my grip, because in that moment, it felt like the only way to protect what was mine. She was clutching my precious tart, and there was no universe in which I was going to let her walk away with it. The delicious, comforting aroma of the tart, which just moments ago had promised quiet satisfaction, now felt like a cruel taunt, an invisible hand fanning the flames of my growing fury. Eventually, with a sudden, unexpected, and powerful jerk, Chloe managed to wrench herself free from my grasp. She stumbled back a step, rubbing her arm, her eyes blazing with hatred, then spun around and started to quickly walk back to where she and Bethany had been sitting, my tart still clutched firmly in her hand. My mind raced, a frantic whirl of disbelief and desperate anger. I had to get up and go after them, propelled by a primal urge to reclaim what was mine. But by the time I reached their shared desk, a mere few steps away, the damage was already done. They had already, brazenly, ripped open the cling film on the plate. Chloe, with an air of triumphant defiance, took a huge, deliberate bite of my tart, her lips smacking, a smug smirk twisting her face as she chewed slowly, savoring my ruined efforts. Bethany leaned over, picking off a large piece of roasted pepper, her eyes meeting mine, daring me, challenging me to do something. They were actually openly eating my food. They set the half-eaten plate down on the table between them, crumbs scattering across their textbooks, and then, with an astonishing display of casual audacity, they went back to scrolling on their phones and pretending to work on their computers, as if the last minute had never happened, as if they hadn't just committed an act of blatant theft and mockery. It was an act of pure, unadulterated contempt, designed to wound and humiliate. My blood ran cold, then boiled with a ferocity I rarely felt. "Give it back," I said, my voice dangerously low, a tremor of pure, distilled rage beneath it. They just looked up, their expressions bored, uninterested. Chloe chewed another mouthful, slowly, deliberately. "Shut up, Liam," she said around a mouthful of my precious tart, crumbs flying. "Go away, it's ours now, finders keepers." Bethany nodded in agreement, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. That was it. That was the absolute, undeniable line. I didn't say another word. My hand shot out, fueled by a surge of desperate anger, snatching the plate back from between them. They both cried out in surprise and indignation, trying to grab it back, but I was faster, stronger in that moment of fury. I ripped off the last remnants of the cling film, a final, definitive, aggressive gesture, and without a moment's hesitation, propelled by a mixture of despair and defiance, I walked straight to the large green bin at the front of the classroom. With a sickening sense of satisfaction, yet a deep, gnawing pain in my chest, I flipped the plate over, dumping the remains of my perfect savory tart, the one I had poured my heart and soul into the overflowing trash. The sight of it, crumpled and ruined, a sad, broken mess among the discarded papers and food wrappers, was a physical punch to the gut. I then turned, walked out of the room, leaving the empty, ruined plate on the teacher's desk, and went to return it to the cooking classroom, my mind a storm of chaotic emotions. When I eventually returned to the study period classroom, a mere few minutes later, after having walked around the school to clear my head, Chloe and Bethany were just nonchalantly sitting there, their expressions completely impassive, acting as if they hadn't done a single thing wrong. The sheer audacity, the utter lack of remorse, the complete disregard for my feelings or property, ignited a dangerous spark inside me, something cold and primal I hadn't even known I possessed. It wasn't just about the food anymore. It was about the profound humiliation, the public disrespect, the blatant theft, and the undeniable injustice of it all. They truly believed they could get away with anything, that their popularity and perceived untouchability shielded them from consequences. My resolve hardened. I walked over to their desk, my steps slow and deliberate, each one a drumbeat of approaching retribution. Chloe looked up, a flicker of something that looked like apprehension, a momentary crack in her confident facade in her eyes. I leaned down just a little, my gaze fixed squarely on her, locking onto her eyes. Then, without a single word, I gathered a mouthful of saliva, a mixture of bitterness and simmering rage, and with all the disgust and contempt I felt for her and her actions, I spat. A direct, satisfying, wet hit, right in the middle of her perfectly made-up face. Chloe shrieked, a sound of pure, unadulterated shock and revulsion, her eyes wide as saucers. Before she could even fully process what had just happened, before her brain could catch up to the disgusting reality, I turned my head, still locked in my cold fury, to Bethany, who had gasped and recoiled in horror. And I spat again, this time hitting her squarely on the cheek, a streak of spittle glistening against her skin. They both exploded simultaneously. "You disgusting pig!" Chloe screamed, wiping her face frantically with her sleeve, her voice laced with outrage and disbelief. "You just spat on me. Are you insane? What is wrong with you?" Bethany was gagging, tears welling in her eyes, her voice choked with disgust, yelling, "Oh my God, that's vile. That is absolutely sickening, Liam. You're a sick, twisted freak." They both started cussing me out, unleashing a torrent of insults, calling me every vile name under the sun, their faces contorted with a fury that mirrored my own. But I didn't react. I just walked calmly back to my chair, sat down, and picked up my textbook, opening it precisely where I had left off. I acted exactly the way they had minutes before, completely nonchalant, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened, going about my schoolwork with an air of complete disinterest. They stared at me for a moment, still sputtering, their insults dying in their throats, before Chloe, her voice trembling with indignation, finally declared, "That's it. This is not over, Liam. We're going to the principal right now." And they stomped out of the room, their hurried footsteps echoing down the quiet hallway, presumably to report me for my atrocious behavior. Sure enough, it wasn't long, probably less than 15 minutes, before I was summoned to the principal's office. Mr. Harrison was a stern, gray-haired man, known for his no-nonsense approach to school discipline. He usually prided himself on being fair, but today something felt off, a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Chloe and Bethany were already there, sitting opposite him, sniffling dramatically, Chloe dabbing at her face with a pristine white tissue, though I was pretty sure she'd already thoroughly wiped away any lingering evidence of my spit. They recounted their version of events with practiced ease, painting me as a wild, unprovoked aggressor who had randomly and violently assaulted them for no reason. They conveniently, and quite predictably, omitted any mention of stealing my food or their relentless mockery. Their faces were a picture of a grieved innocence, tears welling in their eyes just enough to tug at Mr. Harrison's paternal instincts. When it was my turn to speak, I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm and factual. I explained everything from their initial disbelief and taunts about my cooking, to the brazen theft of my tart, to my desperate attempt to stop Chloe, and finally, their deliberate act of eating my food and my subsequent reaction. I even made sure to emphasize how much personal effort and passion I'd poured into that specific tart, how it was a project for Chef Davies, to underline its significance. Mr. Harrison listened, his face unreadable, his fingers steepled under his chin. When I finished, he cleared his throat, a sound that always signaled a judgment was coming. "Liam," he began, his voice surprisingly gentle, almost conciliatory, "I understand your frustration. And taking someone's food without permission, especially a school project, is certainly not acceptable. Chloe, Bethany," he turned to them, his gaze firm but not harsh, "you both know better than that. This is a school, not a free-for-all buffet. You were in the wrong for taking Liam's food." He gave them a stern talking to, a mild reprimand about respecting other students' property. My heart lifted slightly. Perhaps, just perhaps, this would be a moment of genuine fairness. I started to hope that justice might actually prevail. But then he turned back to me, and his expression hardened, a familiar, weary disappointment settling onto his features. "However, Liam," he continued, his voice now laced with a steely disappointment, "your actions escalated the situation far beyond what was necessary or acceptable. Grabbing a fellow student by the arm, regardless of provocation, constitutes physical contact which is against school rules. And then, frankly, the utterly unsanitary and aggressive act of spitting on them. That, Liam, is completely unacceptable and frankly disgusting. We have a zero-tolerance policy for violence or unhygienic behavior of that nature. My jaw clenched so tightly it ached. But they stole my food, sir, I protested, my voice rising in pitch, and they wouldn't give it back. They were actually eating it, mocking me as they did it. Mr. Harrison held up a hand, silencing me. That still does not justify physical contact or spitting. Liam, grabbing a girl by the arm can be very traumatizing. It's something that, unfortunately, outside of these school walls, women experience in real life, and it can leave lasting emotional scars. We must teach our male students to be aware of the impact of their physical actions. My mind reeled, trying to comprehend the sheer mind-boggling absurdity of what he was saying. Traumatizing. For grabbing her arm to stop her from literally stealing my property. The sheer, unbelievable unfairness of it all, the complete lack of proportion, made my blood boil with a new, uncontrollable fury. My rational thought process snapped. The words tumbled out before I could even begin to process or censor them, fueled by a raw, white-hot anger and an overwhelming sense of profound, systemic injustice. "Sir," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm, a bitter, dangerous edge to it. If Chloe didn't want to be traumatized by someone grabbing her arm and holding her, why does she go around stealing food and other stuff from people, knowing full well that actions have consequences and that this kind of defensive reaction might happen to her? With all due respect, sir, is your logic perhaps a little retarded when it comes to fairness? The principal's face, already stern, went from disappointed to absolutely livid in an instant, a furious flush creeping up his neck. Chloe and Bethany gasped, wide-eyed, their previous sniffling forgotten, clearly relishing in my spectacular self-destruction. "Liam Hayes!" Mr. Harrison roared, slamming his hand onto the polished oak of his desk with a thunderous thud that made me jump. "That is utterly disrespectful. You are now suspended for 2 days for your aggressive behavior and unsanitary actions, and for that appalling insubordination, that insufferable insolence towards me, that's now a 4-day suspension. Get out of my office and don't come back until Monday morning." I stood there for a moment, stunned into silence, then a bitter, humorless laugh escaped my lips. 4 days, for daring to question the principal's bizarre, biased reasoning. The girls got a mild talking to, a mere slap on the wrist, and I got a 4-day ban from school, my reputation possibly tarnished. It was outrageously, sickeningly unfair. As frustrated as I was, walking out of that office into the quiet corridor, I felt a strange, cold sense of satisfaction, too. I had stood my ground, even if it cost me dearly. And I had seen the look on Chloe's and Bethany's faces when I spat on them. That momentary, pure shock and visceral disgust was a tiny, fleeting victory in a sea of injustice. On the drive home, as my parents, who were surprisingly calm and supportive once I explained the full, unvarnished story, wisely omitting the retarded comment, of course, tried their best to console me, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The bitter taste of injustice lingered, far more potent and corrosive than the fleeting memory of my ruined tart. I was angry, yes, a deep, simmering fury, but beneath that anger, a cold, calculated thought began to crystallize. This wasn't just about a tart anymore. It was about much more profound things. Proving them wrong, reclaiming my dignity, restoring a sense of fairness, and showing Chloe, Bethany, and even Mr. Harrison that you couldn't treat people like that, abuse your power, and get away with it scot-free. My world had been abruptly shaken, turned upside down by a petty act of cruelty and systemic bias. Now, it was time to shake it back, with interest. My problem wasn't merely solving a 4-day suspension. It was ensuring that justice, real, poetic justice, was meticulously served. And I, Liam Hayes, was going to be the one to serve it, carefully crafted and exquisitely presented. The nemesis was crystal clear. Chloe Peterson, Bethany Clark, and the unfair, biased system that protected their every transgression. And I was just getting started. The fight for my culinary future, my reputation, and my very self-respect had officially begun. The 4-day suspension felt like an eternity, each tick of the old grandfather clock in our hallway, a mocking reminder of the gross injustice that had been inflicted upon me. My parents, bless their hearts, were surprisingly understanding, a testament to how well I'd always behaved previously. My dad, while giving me a predictable, stern lecture about controlling my temper, Liam, a man must learn to channel his anger, not let it rule him, couldn't quite hide the subtle smirk that played on his lips when I recounted Mr. Harrison's traumatizing logic. Even he, a stoic engineer, seemed to agree with my assessment of the principal's intellectual failings. My Nan, when I cautiously told her the full, unvarnished story, simply patted my hand with her calloused fingers, her eyes, usually warm and twinkling, now filled with a quiet, knowing fire. "Some people, Liam," she'd said, her voice soft but firm, "they only understand consequences when they feel them directly. But you, my boy, you make sure your consequences are memorable. Not just a fleeting sting, but a lasting impression, something they won't soon forget." Those words, seemingly simple, echoed in my mind, a subtle encouragement that would later prove to be a guiding light through the darkness of my despair. During my forced absence from school, the quiet hours stretched long, filled with a simmering resentment that began to solidify into something much colder and more purposeful. I spent an unusual amount of time in our kitchen, not cooking with my usual unbridled joy and creativity, but with a new, almost aggressive focus. It was a way to channel the raw, burning anger that threatened to consume me, to knead my frustration into dense bread dough, to chop my indignation into fine, precise dice. Every stir of a pot felt like a strategic move in a silent war, every measured ingredient a calculated step in a meticulously unfolding, vengeful plan. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I couldn't just resort to spitting on them again. That had been a spontaneous, desperate outburst, born of pure, unthinking fury. This time, it needed to be different. It needed to be precise, artfully executed, and utterly, irrevocably devastating. It had to be a dish best served cold, a culinary masterpiece of retribution, meticulously prepared and presented. When I finally, reluctantly, returned to Stonnybrook High, the atmosphere felt thick, almost palpable, with unspoken judgment. It seemed that word, undoubtedly embellished and distorted by Chloe and Bethany, travels at the speed of light in a school this size. Kids I usually greeted with a casual nod or shared a joke with now actively avoided my gaze, some giving me an unnervingly wide berth in the crowded hallways, as if I carried a contagious disease. I couldn't escape the whispered fragments of conversation that floated on the air, always just out of reach but painfully clear. "Did you hear what Liam did? So gross, absolutely barbaric." "Yeah, he just spat on Chloe and Bethany like a raving lunatic for no reason at all." The girls, of course, had leveraged their popularity and played the part of pure, innocent victims with Oscar-worthy performances. meticulously glossing over their blatant theft and brazen mockery, instead painting me as a deranged monster, a menace to society. They walked the school halls with an air of triumphant self-righteousness, Chloe occasionally sporting a dramatically large bandage on her arm, a ridiculous, theatrical prop, as if my firm grip had caused a grievous, life-threatening injury. Bethany, her best friend and accomplice, would occasionally catch my eye and give me a condescending glare, a silent, smug you deserved every bit of it shining in her eyes. My attempts to clear my name, to patiently explain the full, unvarnished story to anyone who would listen, were met with an alarming mixture of skepticism, awkward silence, or outright dismissal. "Liam, we heard what happened," one former friend said, his voice laced with discomfort and a clear desire to escape the conversation. "It sounds pretty messed up, mate. I mean, spitting. That's a bit much, isn't it? Even if they did take your food." It was painfully clear their carefully constructed version of events had taken firm root, becoming the undisputed, accepted truth in the school's collective consciousness. My reputation, once built on quiet competence, a genuine passion for cooking, and a generally friendly, unassuming demeanor, was now entirely overshadowed by the ugly shadow of the incident. I felt like an outcast, a pariah irrevocably branded as the spitter, forever associated with a moment of raw, desperate anger. The feeling of helplessness was a suffocating blanket. My first calculated effort to correct the egregious injustice, apart from my disastrous, ill-advised verbal sparring with Mr. Harrison, was to try a different avenue, one where my true strengths lay. I decided to speak to Chef Davies. He was a practical, no-nonsense man, but he also deeply understood genuine culinary talent and commitment. He knew how much cooking meant to me, how much effort I poured into it. Surely, he, of all people, would understand the profound significance of my tart project, the dedication I'd poured into it, and the malicious nature of its theft. I caught him after class one afternoon, the familiar comforting scent of herbs and baking bread still lingering in his large, industrial kitchen. "Chef," I began, my voice carefully controlled, trying to project a maturity I didn't entirely feel. "I wanted to talk about the incident with the tart. Chloe and Bethany, they really did steal it, and then they ate it right in front of me." He held up a large, flour-dusted hand, stopping me mid-sentence. "Liam," he said, his voice weary but firm, his gaze direct. "I heard all about it in great detail from Mr. Harrison. It's regrettable, very regrettable indeed, that your project was tampered with. Your savory tart was, by all accounts, an exemplary piece of work, truly outstanding, a credit to your skills." A tiny, desperate flicker of hope, a fragile flame in the darkness, ignited within me. Perhaps he would advocate for me, confirm my story. "But," he continued, his voice hardening almost imperceptibly, his expression becoming more distant, "what happened afterwards, your reaction, your choice to use physical force, and then to spit, was entirely unprofessional and frankly, utterly unacceptable in my kitchen or anywhere within these school walls. As a future chef, Liam, you must learn to control your temper, even under the most extreme provocation. You cannot lash out like that. Consequences, Liam. You faced yours and they were appropriate for your actions." He then, without missing a beat, swiftly changed the subject, immediately moving on to a detailed discussion about the next assignment, effectively shutting down any further conversation about the incident. He wasn't overtly malicious, just deeply pragmatic, and his pragmatism meant that he would always side with school policy, with order and control, not with the chaotic mess of my raw, justifiable anger. It was another heavy brick in the already towering wall of my frustration, another reminder that even the person who truly understood my passion couldn't, or wouldn't, help me find justice. The girls, sensing my growing isolation, perceiving my helplessness as a weakness, began to escalate their campaign of subtle, yet deeply insidious torment. In the bustling school canteen, if I dared to sit at a table, they'd make a theatrical show of whispering conspiratorially, then dramatically getting up and moving to another table, giggling loudly, as if my very presence alone was a contaminating, repulsive force. In the crowded hallways, they'd suddenly halt their conversations, turn and whisper and point, turning other unsuspecting students' heads towards me, making me feel like a specimen under a microscope. They never did anything overt enough for a vigilant teacher to intervene, nothing that could be easily reported or proven, but the constant, insidious social exclusion, the quiet mockery, and the persistent ostracism gnawed relentlessly at my self-esteem. One day, during a group project in history, a subject I usually excelled at, Chloe deliberately forgot to do her part of the research, then lost her notes, leaving me to shoulder twice the workload, forcing me to stay up all night to compensate. When our group received a low grade, she effortlessly threw me under the bus, blaming my lack of coordination and unreliability. Mr. Harrison, when I tried yet again to explain the situation, simply told me with a weary sigh to learn to work effectively in a team, Liam, even when facing challenges. This is part of growing up. It was always my fault, always my responsibility to rise above, to be the bigger person, while they seemed to float effortlessly above any real, meaningful consequences, protected by their clique and the school's apathy. My anger, which I had been trying so hard to suppress, to control, began to morph into something much colder, more dangerous, a chilling resolve. It wasn't just about fairness anymore. It was about outright, calculated revenge. They had stolen my peace, my public reputation, and now they were systematically chipping away at my spirit, my very sense of self-worth. The problem truly started to grow bigger, to become an unbearable weight, when it directly impacted my cooking, the very core of my identity. Chef Davies, perhaps trying to offer me a path back to my passion, announced a county-wide junior chef competition, a highly prestigious event that had, in previous years, opened significant doors to renowned culinary colleges and sought-after apprenticeships. This, I realized, was my chance, my golden ticket to proving myself, to showing everyone at Stonnybrook High, and more importantly to myself, that I was more than just the spitter. I poured every ounce of my still-flickering energy into meticulously planning my entry. An ambitious, technically demanding dish, a deconstructed shepherd's pie featuring a light, ethereal parmesan foam and a succulent, slow-cooked confit lamb shoulder. It was a dish that demanded precision, skill, and an almost artistic touch. I spent countless hours after school in the quiet, empty cooking classroom, meticulously perfecting each individual component, dreaming of the day I would present it. Chloe and Bethany, however, seemed determined, almost preternaturally so, to sabotage my efforts. One afternoon, I walked into the kitchen to find my workstation subtly tampered with. My carefully measured spices, laid out for a specific recipe, were haphazardly swapped for different ones. A noticeable pinch of cinnamon where cumin should have been, a sprinkle of salt instead of a critical dash of sugar. It wasn't enough to utterly ruin the dish, but it forced me to painstakingly remeasure and retaste everything, losing valuable, irreplaceable time and introducing a layer of frustrating uncertainty. Another time, my meticulously detailed recipe notes, which I had left secured on my bench with a heavy textbook, were found scattered on the floor, some pages crumpled, others clearly torn. It was petty, childish, utterly frustrating, and deeply disrespectful of my work. I knew with a sinking feeling that it was them. Their knowing, triumphant glances in the hallway the next day confirmed my suspicions, sending a chill down my spine, but proving it was, as always, impossible. Chef Davies, while annoyed by the unacceptable untidiness in his kitchen, couldn't pinpoint the culprits and simply issued a generalized warning to the entire class to be more careful and responsible with communal spaces. It was another dead end. My biggest setback, the one that truly brought me to my knees, came just a week before the highly anticipated competition. I had finally perfected my confit lamb shoulder, a succulent, tender triumph that truly melted in the mouth, each bite bursting with flavor. It was the crowning glory of my dish, the element that would elevate it from good to truly exceptional. I needed to let it rest overnight, steeped in its rich, aromatic fat, a crucial step for both flavor and texture. I labeled the container clearly with my name and the contents, carefully placed it in a special, temperature-controlled cool storage unit in the school kitchen, and locked the unit securely with my own padlock, just as Chef Davies had painstakingly instructed for high-value ingredients. The next morning, I arrived at school even earlier than usual, my heart pounding with a nervous excitement, eager to finish my preparation. I unlocked the unit, my hands trembling slightly with anticipation, and pulled out the shelf where my lamb should have been. My heart plunged into my stomach. My container was empty, utterly, completely empty, gone. All those grueling hours of slow cooking, the expensive prime cut of lamb, the careful, precise seasoning, vanished without a trace. In its place, tucked into the now empty space, a small, cruelly handwritten note, scrawled carelessly on a crumpled napkin, lay mockingly. "Oops, looks like someone was hungry last night. Bet your shepherd's pie won't be as good now, Liam. Maybe stick to boiling water after all. XOXO. It was Chloe's distinctive, elegant handwriting. I knew it instantly, undeniably. A cold wave of utter despair, quickly followed by a searing, nauseating anger, washed over me. This wasn't just petty sabotage or childish pranks. This was direct, malicious destruction of my dedicated work. A calculated act designed specifically to crush my deepest dreams and aspirations. I went straight to Chef Davies, my hands shaking, the crumpled note clutched so tightly in my fist that my knuckles were white. Tears of frustration, hot and humiliating, stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I explained everything, my voice thick with emotion, showing him the note, the empty container. He was absolutely furious, not just at the blatant theft, but at the sheer brazenness, the undisguised cruelty of it. He didn't hesitate. He took me directly to Mr. Harrison's office, his face a thundercloud of righteous indignation. This time, I thought, with a desperate surge of hope, finally, they would be exposed. Finally, the school would see the undeniable truth. They would understand the true severity of this malicious act. Mr. Harrison listened, his face grim as he carefully read the incriminating note. He immediately called Chloe and Bethany to his office. They arrived moments later, their faces a picture of feigned innocence, their eyes wide with bewildered confusion. "Lamb shoulder, what are you talking about, Mr. Harrison?" Chloe asked, batting her long eyelashes, her voice dripping with fake sincerity. "We haven't seen any lamb shoulder. That's a ridiculous accusation. Bethany nodded vigorously in agreement, her own face a mask of shocked incredulity. Mr. Harrison grilled them for a long, uncomfortable period, but they stuck to their meticulously rehearsed story, denying everything with unwavering, practiced conviction, their lies flowing effortlessly. Without any concrete, undeniable proof, no witnesses other than myself, no working security camera footage in the kitchen, which was usually a blind spot, it quickly became a frustrating, infuriating stalemate. Mr. Harrison sighed, rubbing his temples with a weary gesture, a clear sign of his own exasperation. "Liam," he said, his voice heavy with defeat, "I truly believe you feel this happened, and I understand your profound distress. But without any direct, undeniable evidence, a confession, or a reliable witness to corroborate your story, my hands are tied. It's simply your word against theirs, and in a school setting, that isn't enough for punitive action." He gave them yet another stern warning about respecting school property and the vital importance of honesty. But it was hollow, lacking any real bite. It was a mere formality. They walked out of his office moments later, their faces alight with triumphant smirks, turning at the door to give me a fleeting, knowing glance that twisted my stomach into knots. I was utterly devastated. The county-wide competition was only 3 short days away, and I had no lamb shoulder, absolutely no time to prepare another one from scratch, and now, it seemed, no way to definitively prove the girl's cruel culpability. It felt like all my meticulous efforts, all my burning passion, all my carefully nurtured dreams were being systematically dismantled, piece by agonizing piece, by their relentless malice and the school's infuriatingly blind eye. I was forced, with a heavy heart and a sense of profound resignation, to hastily switch my competition entry to a simpler, far less impressive dish, one that didn't require the time-consuming, technical confit lamb. The sheer joy of cooking, which had always been my anchor, my solace, my very identity, felt utterly tainted, overshadowed by a crushing bitterness and a gnawing, suffocating sense of utter helplessness. My parents tried their best to encourage me, telling me to focus on the competition, to simply do my best, but the vibrant spark, the unadulterated pleasure I usually derived from the culinary arts, was gone, replaced by a hollow ache. I felt utterly defeated, my spirit crushed. My dreams felt fragile, slipping through my fingers like grains of fine salt, dissolving into nothingness. Chloe and Bethany, now emboldened by their repeated triumphs and the school's consistent leniency, continued their quiet campaign of social exclusion and psychological warfare, making absolutely certain I felt like an outsider, a complete pariah in my own school. My confidence, once unwavering in the bustling, creative environment of the kitchen, began to bleed into other aspects of my life, starting to waver in the classroom, in the noisy, crowded hallways, even in my own home. I felt small, utterly insignificant, and crushingly alone. The day of the junior chef competition arrived, and I performed mechanically, robotically, without the usual flair, the vibrant energy, or the profound passion that had once defined my cooking. My hastily prepared, deconstructed shepherd's pie, while technically competent and edible, lacked the soul, the spark, the sheer love I usually poured into my dishes. It didn't win, didn't even place among the top entries. Watching other talented young chefs celebrate their hard-won victories, bathed in the vibrant, exhilarating energy of the culinary world, felt like a cruel, twisted mockery of my own dampened spirit, my lost dreams. I went home that day utterly deflated, the crushing weight of the injustice pressing down on me, threatening to suffocate me entirely. My Nan, sensing my profound despair, pulled me into a tight, comforting hug, her small frame radiating warmth. "Liam," she whispered, her voice a gentle balm to my wounded spirit. "You are better than this, my boy. Much, much better. They might have won this battle, Liam, a petty, mean-spirited battle, but the war, my boy, the real war, the fight for your spirit and your future, that is still ahead. You have a rare and beautiful gift. Don't you dare let their ugliness, their petty cruelty, dim your precious light. Don't let them win that way." Her words were a much-needed balm, but the wound was still fresh, raw, and bleeding. The next few weeks that followed were undeniably the lowest point of my entire 17 years. The girls, utterly emboldened by their perceived victory, their total lack of accountability, and the school's infuriating complacency, became even more brazen, their bullying tactics escalating. They'd accidentally trip me in the hallway, making me stumble and drop my books, their apologies dripping with fake concern. They'd mistakenly splash water on my bag in the locker room, wetting my textbooks. They began to actively spread insidious rumors that I was mentally unstable, that my once admirable obsession with cooking was creepy, a sign of something profoundly wrong with me. They even implied I was dangerous, given the spitting incident. Other students, swayed by the pervasive whispers and the girls' popularity, started to openly avoid me, convinced I was some kind of ticking time bomb, a social liability. I felt like I was literally drowning, suffocating under a heavy blanket of social ostracism, relentless bullying, and the constant, debilitating fear of what they would do next. My grades, once a source of quiet pride, began to slip drastically. My once roaring, vibrant passion for cooking, the very thing that defined me, had dwindled to a barely flickering ember, threatening to extinguish completely. I started skipping lunch, seeking refuge in the quiet corners of the library, trying desperately to escape the constant harassment, the insidious whispers, the pointed fingers. Even at home, the kitchen, which had always been my sacred sanctuary, now felt like a constant, agonizing reminder of my public failure, of the dreams they had so cruelly trampled underfoot. I seriously considered quitting school altogether, abandoning my culinary aspirations, giving up on cooking entirely. What was the point? I despaired if every single attempt to succeed, to find joy, to obtain even a shred of justice, was met with relentless mockery, calculated sabotage, and the school's infuriating indifference. I was truly at my absolute lowest, feeling like all was irretrievably lost, that I had no recourse, no power, no agency, and that I would forever be branded the spitter, a perpetual victim of their petty, yet profoundly damaging cruelty and the school's systemic bias. The bitter taste of my ruined tart was a constant companion, but now it was accompanied by the crushing, suffocating weight of utter, irreversible defeat. The darkness felt absolute. The darkness, the oppressive weight of defeat, lingered, but it couldn't completely extinguish the spark within me. Nan's words, "Don't let their ugliness dim your light," kept replaying in my mind, a persistent whisper against the roar of my despair. One bleak afternoon, sitting alone in the forgotten corner of the school library, staring blankly at a history textbook I couldn't possibly focus on, a familiar, inviting scent drifted through the quiet air, faint but unmistakable. Someone was baking something sweet, something comforting in the home economics classroom down the hall. For a fleeting moment, a sharp wave of homesickness for my own kitchen, for the pure, unadulterated joy of creation, washed over me, almost bringing me to tears. Then, the familiar bitterness returned, a cold, metallic taste in my mouth. The girls had taken that joy from me. They had taken everything that made me feel like myself. And the school, with its blind eye, its biased rules, and its infuriating indifference, had simply stood by and let them. My mind, which had been numb with despair, began to stir, no longer in agony, but with a cold, calculating intensity, a burgeoning, precise fury. Spitting on them had been crude, a primitive, desperate reaction. Ruining their reputations directly through simple accusations was too hard, too risky, too easily dismissed. I needed something more subtle, more devastating, something that would hit them where it truly, irrevocably hurt. Their carefully constructed image, their precious social standing, their cherished sense of untouchable superiority. And it had to be undeniable, irrefutable, something that couldn't possibly be dismissed as my word against theirs, or just another misunderstanding. It had to be poetic, a culinary revenge, a dish so exquisitely crafted that its message was unmistakable. A plan, intricate and surprisingly delicious, began to form, slowly but surely, in the quiet recesses of my mind, born from the very skill they had so cruelly mocked and systematically tried to destroy. The school's annual charity bake sale was rapidly approaching, a highly anticipated event on the school calendar. It was a huge, widely promoted affair, with parents, teachers, and students all encouraged to contribute their absolute best baked goods, a public display of community spirit and culinary prowess. Chloe and Bethany, being the self-appointed popular girls, always made a grand show of contributing, usually some ridiculously expensive, clearly store-bought cupcakes artfully arranged to look painstakingly homemade, accompanied by a lot of dramatic sighs about all the work they'd put in. This, I realized with a jolt of exhilaration, was it. This was my stage. My revenge wouldn't be about destroying their physical property or resorting to crude aggression, but about publicly, undeniably, revealing their true, ugly nature, using my own strength, my unique culinary abilities against them. The target wasn't just them, but the entire deceptive facade they had built around themselves, and by extension, the unfair system that had allowed them to flourish, unchecked. My heart, which had felt so heavy, so defeated, began to beat with a renewed, fierce purpose, a thrumming rhythm of anticipation. This wasn't just about getting even anymore. It was about reclaiming my name, restoring my dignity, and unequivocally reasserting my passion. I started preparing, secretly, meticulously, poring over old recipe books and making careful notes. The first crucial step was reconnaissance. I needed to know exactly what Chloe and Bethany planned to contribute to the bake sale. I became a master of subtle observation, honing my senses. I listened intently, straining to catch snippets of their conversations in the canteen, pretending to be deeply engrossed in a textbook in the library when they were discussing their brilliant ideas with their clique. It didn't take long. They finally settled on making what Chloe proudly declared would be the most amazing, super cute pink lemonade cupcakes, like totally Pinterest-worthy and delicious. Bethany agreed enthusiastically, adding that they'd be bursting with summery flavor. Everyone will adore them. Perfect. Knowing their typical, utter lack of genuine culinary skill, their general laziness and disdain for real effort, I correctly guessed they'd either buy a generic box mix and add a few drops of food coloring, or more likely simply purchase pre-made, bland supermarket cupcakes and decorate them to look homemade. The next critical step was acquiring the right, specific ingredients for my own, very special, revenge. I spent weeks saving up every penny, using my meager pocket money and earnings from odd jobs I picked up from neighbors. I wasn't just going to bake. I was going to create a complex, multi-layered masterpiece of culinary deception. My elaborate plan involved three main, interconnected parts, each carefully designed to escalate the impact and maximize the public humiliation. First, I needed to expose their fundamental lie about making homemade goods, to show the world their true, shallow nature. Second, I needed to replace their store-bought, fraudulent items with something else, something far more fitting. And third, that something else needed to be truly memorable, subtly reflecting their bitter, ugly characters, delivered in a way that was undeniably and unalterably tied to them, a direct and undeniable consequence of their own deceit. I started my baking spree in secret, late into the night, using Nan's kitchen when she was sound asleep, the quiet hum of the fridge my only companion. I honed my skills, pushing myself harder than ever before, revisiting old techniques, learning new ones. I made multiple batches of cupcakes, not just any cupcakes, but ones designed to look innocuously appealing at first glance then, and only then, reveal their true, horrific nature upon consumption. For Chloe, the supposed super cute pink lemonade cupcakes would become something far, far less palatable, a cruel mockery of her superficiality. For Bethany, the quiet accomplice, something subtly, yet definitively, disgusting, a reflection of her inner unpleasantness. I carefully, meticulously concocted a special, secret recipe for each girl. For Chloe's batch, I made what appeared to be perfectly innocent, beautifully decorated pink lemonade cupcakes, complete with a swirling frosting and tiny sprinkles. But these were no ordinary cupcakes. Instead of a normal lemon extract, I used a high-quality, ultra-sour lemon essence, far beyond what any normal recipe would call for, making the lemon flavor overwhelming and abrasive. And then, for the truly nasty surprise, I combined it with a secret ingredient, a very small, almost undetectable amount of a natural, yet intensely bitter root powder I'd sourced from a specialist herbal shop. It wouldn't be harmful, just intensely unpleasant, leaving a lingering, almost metallic aftertaste that no amount of sweetness or frosting could ever mask. The bitterness was cleverly designed to subtly intensify after a few minutes, making the initial bite seem deceptively innocent, then slowly, agonizingly, becoming utterly unbearable. For Bethany's batch, I crafted what appeared to be delightful vanilla bean cupcakes with a vibrant, eye-catching green frosting. The frosting, however, contained an extremely potent, yet completely harmless flavor extract of a very specific and unpopular vegetable. Not just any vegetable, but one notoriously known for its strong, slightly offensive, and distinctly sulfurous odor and taste. Think overcooked Brussels sprouts left out in the sun for a week, but 10 times worse, concentrated into a tiny drop. The vivid green coloring would further enhance the deception, making people instinctively associate the truly vile taste with something natural, yet truly, profoundly awful. Finally, as a stark contrast, and to demonstrate my genuine culinary talent, I also created a third, perfectly normal and undeniably delicious batch of my signature miniature carrot cakes with a rich, tangy cream cheese frosting, baked with all the love and skill I genuinely possessed. These would be my personal, legitimate contribution to the bake sale. The day before the highly anticipated bake sale, the school held a designated drop-off period in the main hall, allowing students to bring in their contributions. Chloe and Bethany, exactly as I had predicted, arrived with their homemade pink lemonade cupcakes, perfectly arranged on a gleaming tiered stand, looking entirely too perfect, too uniform, too factory-produced. I watched them from a distance, pretending to be engrossed in my phone, carefully noting where they placed their items among the hundreds of other offerings. My moment wouldn't be during the chaotic, supervised drop-off. It would be after school hours, when the hall was empty, dark, and utterly silent, and the baked goods were left overnight, ready for display and sale first thing in the morning. I had managed, through careful observation and a bit of luck, to acquire a spare, rarely used key to the school's kitchen supply closet, a small, often forgotten room that conveniently connected directly to the main hall through a rarely used service door. My plan was risky, requiring absolute precision, unwavering focus, and nerves of steel. That evening, after everyone had left, after the last teacher had locked their classroom door, and the entire school was cloaked in an unsettling quiet, I snuck back in. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the soft squeak of my trainers on the polished linoleum floors as I moved. I moved like a ghost, a shadow slipping through the deserted corridors, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my resolve as cold and hard as steel. I made my way to the main hall, the faint glow of emergency lights illuminating the long tables. The display tables were laden with baked goods, row upon row of cakes, cookies, brownies, and of course, cupcakes, all neatly covered with cling film. I quickly located Chloe and Bethany's stand, their perfectly pink lemonade cupcakes glinting under the dim hall lights like innocent, deadly little jewels. I had brought a large, empty, but meticulously clean Tupperware container hidden in my bag. My first, crucial task was to remove their fraudulent, store-bought cupcakes. With surgical precision, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins, I carefully lifted each of their perfectly identical cupcakes from their display, placing them gently and silently into my container. I then replaced them, one by one, with my identically decorated but malevolently altered versions. The hyper-sour, bitter pink lemonade ones for Chloe's row, the vile, green-frosted, sprout-flavored ones for Bethany S. The transformation was seamless, undetectable in the dim light. I then took their actual, genuinely store-bought cupcakes, their meager attempt at deception, and with a grim, satisfying sense of poetic justice, I deposited them deep within the school's largest industrial waste bin, ensuring they would never see the light of day, never taint anyone's taste buds, never allow them to profit from their lies. It was a subtle, elegant switch, a silent culinary Trojan horse, its deadly cargo hidden within its sweet exterior. My own carrot cakes, perfectly normal and deliciously inviting, I placed prominently on another, separate table, clearly labeled with my name and a simple description. Liam Hayes' homemade carrot cake. It was crucial that my own, genuine and truly delicious work was recognized as a stark, undeniable contrast. The next morning, the annual charity bake sale was, outwardly, a huge, bustling success. The main hall buzzed with vibrant energy, filled with excited students, bustling teachers, and even many proud parents. Chloe and Bethany were absolutely beaming, standing proudly next to their cupcake display, their heads held high, accepting a torrent of compliments for their amazing homemade creations. Mr. Harrison was there too, mingling with parents, shaking hands, his face wreathed in smiles as he praised the students for their contributions to the school. I stood nearby, pretending to browse the other stalls, my heart thumping a silent, anxious rhythm of anticipation, my eyes glued to their table. I watched, an invisible observer, as people began to buy Chloe and Bethany's cupcakes, eager for a sweet treat. The first few bites were always fine, deceptively so. Then I saw it. A parent, a polite, middle-aged woman, having taken a bite of a pink lemonade cupcake, frowned, her brow furrowing, then quickly swallowed with obvious difficulty, a perplexed expression marring her features. She took another cautious nibble, clearly trying to understand the strange taste, then subtly reached for a bottle of water, taking a large gulp. A history teacher, a usually jovial man, trying a green frosted one, suddenly looked rather green himself, his usually cheerful smile faltering as he tried to politely, discreetly, dispose of the rest of it into a napkin. Chloe and Bethany, still basking in the glow of initial, misplaced praise, didn't notice at first, too caught up in their own self-congratulation. But then, slowly, insidiously, the complaints started to trickle in, then swell into a chorus. "Excuse me," a brave student said, approaching Chloe, her face scrunched up in distaste. "These pink lemonade cupcakes, they taste really weird, like super bitter, almost metallic. Did you forget an ingredient, or add too much of something?" Chloe, flustered, laughed nervously, a desperate, fake sound. "Oh no, they're just very lemony. Perhaps you're not used to such intense flavor." She stammered, trying to brush it off, but more and more people started to grimace. A few younger children, after a single bite of the green ones, spat them out directly onto the floor, crying openly that they tasted like rotten cabbage or old socks. The expressions on people's faces morphed rapidly from polite enjoyment to confusion, then to outright, unadulterated disgust. Bethany, trying one of her own green cupcakes, perhaps to prove a point, immediately recoiled, her face turning a sickly shade of green herself, a genuine look of horror dawning in her eyes. "Oh, my word," she gagged, clutching her throat. "What is that? It tastes like a bin, like pure sewage." The chaos escalated swiftly. People were complaining loudly, openly, some discreetly, some not so discreetly, spitting out bites into napkins or rushing to the nearest bin. Parents were starting to demand refunds, their faces contorted with irritation. Mr. Harrison, his attention finally drawn by the growing commotion around Chloe and Bethany's table, strode over, his brow furrowed with concern, his usual composure visibly rattled. "What seems to be the problem here, girls?" he asked, picking up a pink lemonade cupcake, curiosity outweighing caution. Chloe, her fake smile trembling, still trying desperately to salvage the rapidly deteriorating situation, stammered, "There's no problem, sir. Some people just don't appreciate unique, experimental flavors." Mr. Harrison took a cautious bite. His eyes immediately widened. He chewed slowly, his face visibly contorting into an expression of profound, utter distaste. He took another, smaller bite, clearly trying to discern the flavor, to be fair. Then his face visibly paled, turning a shade of sickly green much like Bethany's. He practically choked, swallowing with great difficulty, a visible shiver running down his spine. "This," he managed to say, his voice strained, laced with unhidden disgust, "this is extraordinarily bitter, Chloe, utterly unpalatable." "And the green ones," he looked at Bethany, who was still trying to recover from her own disastrous taste test, her eyes watering. "Smell frankly quite offensive, Bethany. What exactly are these?" The murmurs grew louder, swelling into outright laughter and snide comments. People were now openly talking about the disgusting cupcakes from Chloe and Bethany's table. Some even started making pointed jokes about Liam and his revenge from the earlier spitting incident. But now, instead of disgusted whispers, it was accompanied by knowing, uncomfortable laughs, a subtle shift in the narrative. Chloe and Bethany, their faces a mixture of confusion, horror, and a rapidly dawning, sickening realization, were visibly panicking. They knew deep down that they hadn't made those cupcakes. But who had? And how? The beautiful, carefully constructed facade of their popularity, their image of effortless perfection, was crumbling, utterly destroyed before their very eyes. They tried to deny they were responsible, to say someone must have swapped their pristine cupcakes, desperately pointing fingers, trying to shift blame. But the undeniable, damning evidence was right there, on their display, prominently bearing their own name labels. The sheer public humiliation was complete, undeniable, irreversible. People were laughing, not with them, but directly, mockingly at them. Their carefully curated reputation for being perfect, for being able to do no wrong, for being untouchable, was shattered into 1,000 tiny, bitter pieces. It wasn't physical pain, but it was a deep, searing wound to their pride, their fragile egos, and their carefully cultivated social standing. Far, far more painful for them than any temporary suspension could ever be for me. The school bake sale, meant to be a triumph for the entire school community, became, instead, a public spectacle of their spectacular, humiliating undoing. I watched it all unfold, a quiet, almost invisible observer, a deep, satisfying warmth spreading through my chest. I saw the vibrant color drain from Chloe's perfectly made-up face as Mr. Harrison, still visibly reeling from the vile taste of the bitter cupcake, ordered her and Bethany, his voice flat and disgusted, to immediately remove all their remaining creations from the table. I saw their perfect smiles crumble, collapse, replaced by expressions of utter despair and dawning realization as their classmates openly pointed and whispered, "Look at Chloe and Bethany's gross cupcakes. Can you believe it?" The poetic consequence was undeniable, exquisite. Their brazen attempt to appear talented, generous, and charitable had backfired spectacularly, revealing them to the entire school as either utterly incompetent cooks or, far worse, deceitful, manipulative frauds. My own carrot cakes, placed strategically on another table, a beacon of genuine culinary talent, sold out quickly, praised universally for their delicious taste, their authentic homemade quality, and their comforting sweetness. The contrast between my honest work and their bitter, foul-tasting deception was stark, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. The aftermath was glorious, a quiet, profound triumph. Chloe and Bethany, their faces still etched with humiliation, tried, for days, to complain to Mr. Harrison, swearing vehemently that someone had maliciously switched their cupcakes, pointing accusing, desperate fingers at me. But Mr. Harrison, still haunted by the vile taste of the bitter cupcake, which he reportedly couldn't get out of his mouth for hours, was in no mood for their usual dramatics, their endless stream of lies. "Girls," he said, his voice clipped and utterly devoid of his usual patience, "you presented these as your own work. They were prominently displayed on your stand, under your names. We simply cannot have students submitting inedible items, especially for a charity event that reflects on the entire school. This is deeply embarrassing for the school and its reputation." He gave them immediate detention, a real, substantial one this time, for lack of honesty and causing significant disruption to a school event. and, in a final, crushing blow, banned them from participating in any future school events for the remainder of the academic year. The lack of concrete proof meant I couldn't be formally accused, and my own undeniably delicious cakes spoke a truth that no amount of their desperate lies could overcome. Chef Davies, seeing my perfectly baked carrot cakes sell out within minutes, gave me a rare, genuine smile and a firm nod of approval, a silent recognition of my victory. "Liam," he said, his voice low, "your baking is back to its usual exceptional standard. Excellent work, lad." It felt like a warm, comforting sun finally breaking through after a long, cold, and utterly desolate winter. My new normal at Stonnybrook High was dramatically, undeniably different. The persistent whispers about the spitter faded completely, replaced by a grudging respect, even a subtle admiration. People started talking about Liam, the amazing baker, especially after my delicious carrot cakes became an instant, legendary hit throughout the school. Chloe and Bethany, utterly humbled, deeply embarrassed, and effectively ostracized, largely kept to themselves, their previous loud confidence replaced by a quiet, sulking resentment. Their carefully constructed popularity plummeted like a stone. They were no longer the untouchable queens of the school, but simply the girls who brought the gross cupcakes to the bake sale, forever associated with public humiliation and bad taste. It was a subtle, yet profound, irreversible shift in the school's intricate social hierarchy. I felt a deep, abiding sense of fulfillment, a quiet triumph that settled in my bones. Justice had been served, not through crude shouting or pointless violence, but through skill, cunning, and a perfectly executed, deliciously undeniable culinary counterattack. I had reclaimed my passion, restored my damaged reputation, and firmly re-established my place, not just in the school, but in my own life. Life settled into a new, incredibly satisfying rhythm. I was back in the kitchen, experimenting with a renewed, vibrant joy, my dreams of opening my own bistro feeling more tangible, more within reach than ever before. Chef Davies even started offering me extra, one-on-one lessons after school, recognizing my renewed dedication and genuine talent, seeing my potential clearly. My grades steadily improved across the board, my confidence soaring to new heights. The entire, painful incident had fundamentally changed me, made me more resilient, more resourceful, and most importantly, it had taught me that true power lay not in brute force or empty threats, but in sharp intellect, meticulous planning, and creative, undeniable strategy. I had faced my nemesis, not with raw anger, but with calculated precision and undeniable skill. The twist, the final, unexpected flourish to my poetic justice, came months later, long after the bake sale incident had become just a funny, whispered school legend, a cautionary tale. I was working a Saturday shift at a charming local patisserie, a highly sought-after part-time job Chef Davies had personally helped me secure. It was a bustling morning, the air filled with the scent of fresh coffee and pastries, and I was in the back, meticulously decorating a delicate wedding cake, my focus absolute. Suddenly, I heard a familiar, shrill, utterly unmistakable voice from the front of the shop. "Oh my God, Bethany, it's him, the spitter." I froze, my hand hovering over the intricate sugar work. It was Chloe with Bethany walking past the shop's large front window. They saw me through the glass in my crisp white chef's jacket, clearly thriving, clearly successful, clearly happy. For a fleeting moment, their faces contorted with renewed disgust and a potent, bitter anger. They paused, whispering conspiratorially, their eyes darting between me and the shop. Then Chloe's face twisted into a familiar, malevolent smirk, and she raised her phone, clearly intending to take a photo, probably to share online and attempt to resurrect the old, long-dead rumors to chip away at my newfound peace. But before she could even snap the picture, an older woman, elegant and stern, with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing, who had been sitting calmly at a table nearby, enjoying her coffee and a scone, slowly stood up. She walked directly and purposefully to the shop window where Chloe and Bethany stood gawking, her eyes cold, narrowed. "Excuse me, girls," she said, her voice clear and authoritative, cutting through the general buzz of the cafe. "Is there a problem here? Are you harassing the staff?" Chloe, caught entirely off guard, lowered her phone instantly, her face flushing. "Oh no, Mrs. Harrison," she stammered, recognizing the principal's wife, a woman known for her formidable presence. "Just Liam. He used to be at our school." Mrs. Harrison raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, her gaze unwavering. "Yes, I know Liam," she said, her voice dripping with approval. "He's a remarkable young man. And that young lady," she pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at a stunned Bethany, "you look familiar. Weren't you one of the girls who served my husband that utterly revolting, vile cupcake at the charity bake sale last year? He still talks about it, you know. Said it was the most disgusting thing he's ever tasted in his life, and he's eaten some peculiar things during his travels. It was truly memorable, in the worst possible way." Chloe and Bethany's faces went pure white, their smugness evaporating instantly, replaced by utter mortification and dawning horror. Mrs. Harrison gave them a disapproving glare that could curdle milk and freeze a smile. "I suggest you both move along," she said, her voice laced with icy disdain, utterly dismissing them. "And perhaps find something more productive to do with your time than harass hardworking young people who are building a real future for themselves." Chloe and Bethany, utterly, completely mortified, muttered incoherent apologies and practically fled the shop, their shoulders hunched, their previous confidence shattered once more. Mrs. Harrison turned back to me, a small, knowing, almost conspiratorial smile playing on her lips, then calmly returned to her coffee, leaving me utterly speechless, a wide grin spreading across my face. It wasn't just poetic justice. It was an unexpected, lingering victory, a delicious, final flourish, delivered by the very family of the man who had initially failed to provide it. The taste of revenge, perfectly executed, was truly the sweetest of all, and it lingered, a satisfying warmth, long after the last customer had left.